Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's hearing. We'll begin momentarily. My name is Chris White, and I will be your moderator today. Today, we'll hear 3 formal presentations, followed by public testimony. Please note that for the public testimony portion of today's meeting, individuals will be limited to 3 minutes each. We will call upon you in the order in which you signed up. When we call your name, please unmute your computer and begin speaking. If you are not available or are running into technical problems, we will call upon you again later. If you did not pre-register and wish to give testimony, you will have an opportunity to speak once we conclude the list of those who pre-registered. At this time, we will ask you to click Raise Your Hand in the dropdown so we may call upon you. If you are unable to testify today, or if you changed your mind, your testimony may be submitted directly to the wage board. We have a timer screen set up, so help us adhere to the 3-minute testimony limit. Please look for the timer window now. When you see the yellow light, your time is coming to a close. When you see the red light, your time is up. We will be strictly enforcing the 3-minute rule. Before we begin, I do have some ground rules to share. You have all been muted upon entry. Please remain muted unless you have been called to speak. This will help eliminate any background noise or echoing. Please do not interrupt when someone else is speaking, and please do not use abusive language. Please note that any offensive behavior will result in removal from today's hearing. Also, please note that this hearing is being recorded. We will now begin the hearing, starting with New York State Labor Commissioner Roberta Reardon to deliver her charge to the board. Commissioner.
Thank you. Let me begin by thanking each of you for agreeing to perform this very important public service by serving on the wage board. I want to thank Brenda McDuffie for agreeing to serve as our chairperson, as well as board members Dennis Hughes and David Fisher. You each have a unique background that gives you special insight into the concerns of farmers, workers, and the public that you should draw on. As you conduct your deliberations, I am confident that you will respect and appreciate the perspectives of your colleagues and work together to meet the goals set forth in this charge. New York has a long history of setting minimum wages and overtime protections through wage boards and wage orders that focus on specific industries and occupations. From the 1930s until 1960, that was the only way that minimum wage and overtime protections were established. In 1960, the legislature changed the law to establish a single statewide minimum wage, but kept the old system in place to allow wage boards to recommend higher minimum wages and overtime rates for specific industries and occupations. For farm laborers, the history of minimum wage and overtime protections is not as lengthy, but history is being made today. As compared with employees in other industries, farm laborers had to wait an additional 30 years to get the first minimum wage in 1969, another 30 years for their wage to equal that of other workers in 1999, and another 20 years to get any overtime protections in 2020. History was made earlier this year when we convened New York's first of 4 farm laborers' wage boards to solicit your recommendations on overtime work for farm laborers. These hearings are at the direction of the legislature and Governor Cuomo as part of the 2019 Farm Laborers Fair Labor Practices Act and pursuant to minimum wage provisions of Articles 19 and 19A of the labor law. The Farm Laborers Fair Labor Practices Act extended worker protections to farm laborers in many areas, including collective bargaining, workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, housing, day of rest, and overtime. The task of this Farm Laborers Wage Board is narrowly focused on the issue of overtime, and specifically, your charge is as follows. The board shall make recommendations for overtime work for farm laborers that shall not be in excess of 60 hours. The board shall consider the extent to which overtime hours can be lowered below the 60 hours set in law, and the board may provide for a series of successively lower overtime work thresholds and phase-in dates as part of its determinations. Your task is to engage in a meaningful inquiry focused on these workers, on this industry, and the underlying state policy and legislative purpose. As you receive public testimony, I encourage you to take the opportunity to ask questions and engage those who testify to identify what you can about these workers, this industry, and about overtime standards more generally. We at the Department of Labor will endeavor to provide you with the information you need to assist in your deliberations. Michael Paglialanga, Deputy General Counsel to the Department of Labor, is serving as counsel to the board and will be available in connection with legal issues. Milan Bhatt, Acting Deputy Commissioner for Worker Protection, will serve as secretary to the board and will be your first line of communication with the department. Kevin Hannell and his staff at our Research and Statistics Division will provide you with available research material. In addition to those resources within the department, the board may consult with agricultural employers and farm laborers and their respective representatives. In the occupation or occupations involved, and with such persons, including the Commissioner of Labor and the Commissioner of Agriculture and Markets, as it shall determine. The time you have to do your work is limited. You have conducted one in-person hearing earlier this year, and you have 3 other virtual hearings scheduled so far, including tonight. The public currently has the opportunity to provide comments by these hearings. You will have until December 31st, 2020 to submit your report and recommendations to the governor and the legislature. During the 45 days following your report, I may confer with you and may remand the matter back to you for further consideration. Again, thank you for your service on the Wage Board. At this point, I'd like to turn this over to Michael Paglialanga to discuss the legal standards and relevant legislative history that you should be aware of. Michael?
And actually, one moment just before you begin, we're just going to ask everyone, please, to just make sure you speak very slowly going forward, just because we do have interpreters interpreting. Thank you, Commissioner. Mike?
And thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Chris. The Farm Laborers Fair Labor Practices Act entrusts this wage board with the authority to make recommendations regarding overtime for farm workers. In doing so, the Act places various restrictions on this wage board and the recommendations it can make. As the Commissioner explained to you in her charge, your role is limited to looking at the issue of overtime. While you can recommend that the overtime threshold be reduced, you cannot recommend an increase in the threshold, which is currently set at 60 hours. In a similar vein, you are restricted from considering this issue and may not further limit any rights, protections, benefits, or entitlements. The Act directs you to consider existing overtime rates in similarly situated industries in New York State. While most industries and occupations require an overtime premium of time and a half of the employee's regularly hourly wage for work over 40 hours, there are some exceptions. For example, certain residential workers earn an overtime premium only after 44 hours. In addition, certain workers who are exempt from overtime at the federal level are entitled to overtime under state law at time and a half the minimum wage, rather than time and a half their regular rate, which may be higher than the minimum wage. As the Commissioner indicated earlier, wage boards play an important role in shaping the livelihood of workers. The labor law's general minimum wage provisions, which now cover farm laborers, direct wage boards and the Commissioner to consider the following principles when establishing minimum wages and regulations. The amount sufficient to provide adequate maintenance and protect the public health, the value of the work or classification of work performed, and the wages paid in the state for work of like and comparable character. In establishing the present board and establishing the current overtime threshold for farm laborers, the legislature made the following findings. Despite regularly working 50, 60, or 70 or more hours a week doing arduous and difficult work, farm laborers remain excluded from overtime and other labor protections that are in place at the state and or federal level for other workers. This industry is subject to unique and unpredictable factors, including climate and weather, pricing and market requirements, seasonal harvests, immigration, and various federal and state laws, rules, and regulations that directly impact farmers and require a unique balance in the application of traditional labor protections to ensure farm laborers have access to basic labor protections, while also creating adaptability and responsiveness to the unique circumstances of farm operations. The labor standards included in this bill are intended solely for the purposes of transitioning into a modern structure of benefits and of rights and benefits for farm workers that achieve harmonious labor relations and stability of operations in the agricultural industry, and are not intended for any other industry or sector of the economy. Your responsibility is to give serious and careful thought to this and the comments you will hear and be guided in making your recommendations. So I wanted to thank you, and at this time, I'm pleased to welcome the Wage Board Chair, Brenda McDuffie.
Thank you, Counsel. Good evening, and welcome to the Farm Wage Board meeting this evening. I am Brenda McDuffie. Commissioner Reardon, I appreciate the opportunity to serve as the chair of the Farm Wage Board. Welcome to the members of the public in attendance today and to those who will share their testimony with us. I would like to introduce my fellow board members who are with us this evening. Representing the Farm Bureau, Mr. David Fisher, and representing the New York State AFL-CIO, we have Mr. Dennis Hughes. I look forward to working with both of you on this very important matter. Our charge is clear, and I believe that there is much to be gained by having meetings as we're having this evening to hear the personal stories and accounts and learn from them in the coming months as we deliberate. I believe I speak for all of us when I say that all of our work will be done thoroughly and diligently to fulfill our duties. Before we move ahead with our agenda, I want to remind all of us of the ground rules and the general order of this evening's hearings. Individuals, as you heard earlier, will testify for 3 minutes. There is a timer that will remind us of that during your oral testimony. We have the timer set to help us adhere to this limit. And please look for the timer window. It will be strictly enforced. And just as you drive, you'll have a green, yellow, and red light that will give you warnings as necessary. I would like to direct your attention to our general rules for conducting this virtual hearing. I'd ask that you take a moment to read them as they appear on the screen. As was mentioned earlier, we are recording this hearing. The recording and transcripts will be available on the Department of Labor's website, labor.ny.gov. There are 2 additional public hearings scheduled over the coming week. They are tomorrow, Thursday, the 27th of August at 12 noon, and Monday, August 31st at 12 noon. You can find more details on the hearing on the department's website also. As necessary, I may call for short breaks. With that, I'd like to invite Kevin Hannon for a short presentation on the agriculture industry of New York State. We know it's a critical economy in our state. Kevin is the Chief of Labor Statistics for the Department of Labor's Division for Research and Statistics. Kevin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is my honor today to share with you some of the big picture information we have available on the agricultural industry. The Department of Labor maintains records on all employers and industries in New York State. The numbers I'm sharing with you today focus on two of those industries, crop production and animal production. Last year, these two similarly sized industries employed just under 24,000 workers at more than 2,000 establishments around the state. Agricultural industry employers paid more than $887 million in wages. Certain regions of the state have more agricultural establishments than other regions. The Finger Lakes has the most, followed by the Hudson Valley and Western New York. New York City, with its densely urban environment, has the fewest. Most of these are small employers. While it can vary by season, the number of workers per farm averages less than 10 for more than 2/3 of these establishments.
Kevin, I'm just gonna jump in really quick. Do you mind just slowing down just a touch for the interpreter? Really appreciate it. Thank you.
While farm workers are a diverse group, according to the census data reviewed by our state data center, there are some commonalities. Agricultural workers tend to be slightly younger than workers in other industries. In the agricultural workforce, the number of males far outweighs the number of females, comprising nearly 3 out of 4 workers. When it comes to educational attainment, compared to other industries, a much higher share of the agricultural workforce does not yet have a high school diploma or equivalent. But they work hard. 41% of agricultural workers put in 41 or more hours a week, compared to an average of 25% of all workers in New York State. And animal production is the industry with the highest share of workers putting in 60+ hours a week. I hope you found this information useful. We look forward to working with the board over the next months. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for that information. Now we can proceed with testimony. Individuals who are pre-registered will be called upon in the order in which you registered by our moderator. Individuals who do not appear to testify on the first call will be called again by the moderator after we complete the pre-registered list. So it's important that you listen out and acknowledge. After the moderator has called the complete list of pre-registered participants, the moderator will call upon anyone else who would like to give testimony. Moderator, can we please begin?
Thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman. And the first person delivering testimony today will be Art Gladstone. And just a reminder that when we call upon you, please unmute yourself if you're not unmuted already when we unmute you. Please announce your name, your organization, if applicable, and you may begin your testimony. And just a reminder to please read slowly. Thank you.
My name is Art Gladstone, and I speak today in support of leaving in place the 60-hour per week threshold for payment of overtime wages. I have been and continue to be involved in the agricultural community for over 20 years. And in that time, I have worked with the totality of participants in this arena. It is my hope that members will read or have read a background statement I provided. If the current pandemic has shown us anything, it's that in order to make sound judgments and policy decisions, there must be access to factual, reliable, and valid data. Added to that must be transparency with the processes, procedures, and mechanisms under which that data has been obtained, especially as it regards the efficacy of the decision to keep the current threshold or change it. In my day-to-day activities working in agriculture, I hear from employers and farm workers alike. There is a great unease on what is to happen. Transparency is mandatory so that all parties, especially the workforce, know and understand how changes in this law will affect them. What I've observed is that effective outreach to those workers who would most be affected by changes has not occurred. When asked if anyone has been in contact with them to explain either the general Farm Worker Fair Labor Practices Act or how the changes in the overtime rule would or could affect them, the overarching response is workers have heard nothing. All they know that in most cases, their earnings in comparison to previous years have been impacted negatively. Given the nature of the two populations overwhelmingly responsible for performing on-farm employment, they are seeing no increase in wages due to overtime, but a reduction in hours and days worked so employees can remain within the current limits. Further reducing the overtime threshold will in all likelihood result in significant losses in earnings for the workforce. I hear rumblings of workers, despite long-standing relationships with New York State farmers, who will be looking for other venues where they can again regain the hours worked to meet their financial needs and goals. The transparency.
Really quick, just do you mind slowing down just a touch?
Okay.
I appreciate it.
The transparency is imperative as feelings within the employers I interact with are already ranging from skepticism to downright cynicism. There is little optimism for their views being heard with these hearings being undertaken before a single harvest season has underway with the new rules being in place. Given the brevity of New York's growing season, holding these hearings amidst their busiest time of year does not give many businesses a sense that they will be legitimately heard and decisions regarding the threshold have already been made. I strongly support the continuation of the current threshold for overtime. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you, Mr. Gladstone. And I can assure you as the chair, and I know my colleagues join me, that no decisions have been made. We apologize. No one expected COVID and expected the impact it would have. But as you know, we have a charge to be accomplished within a time frame. And so we will take all of the testimony into consideration and continue to listen to you and others about this very important matter. So I would ask my fellow board members if they have any questions of Mr. Gladstone.
If I could just say, I have emailed in a statement of my background, which I feel is quite different given where I came from, how I came to work within the agricultural community. I do hope that members of the board will take a moment to read through that document so that they can see where I've come from, how I've come to establish the beliefs that I have regarding this issue that I hold very important.
And we will make sure we receive those. Those are all part of the information that we will consider. I thank you.
Thank you very much.
Chris, would you please? Next.
Absolutely. Our next speaker will be Dale Hemminger. Dale, you may unmute yourself.
My name is Dale Hemminger. I'm the primary owner and old guy here at Hemdale Farms and Greenhouses. We're located here in Ontario County, right next to the Cornell Ag Tech Farm outside of Geneva. You should have the letter I submitted back in March when the other hearings got postponed. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to two of my employees to talk to you for just a couple words each. I have been blessed to have a rewarding 45-year career in this industry, and I hope my son, who's managing the computer right now, might use the last 30 seconds up if it's available. And these young guys have a chance to have as rewarding a career in agriculture as I have had. And the last sentence in this letter that I wrote reads, I hope they can have that opportunity so they can compete with other states and Canada. Thank you. I'm now going to introduce Eric Van Hoof.
My name is Eric Van Hoof. I have an agricultural degree from SUNY Morrisville. I am the shop and operations manager here at Hemdale Farms. I oversee 12 full-time employees and 9 part-time employees. On the crop side, we work in acres, not hours. It's absolutely necessary to put in over 60 hours when the weather is perfect for planting and harvesting. My crew is currently upset with being held to 60 hours at this time, and if it lowers or gets less, it'd be even worse. Thank you.
My name is Luis Villanueva, and I have worked here for 8 years. I have been chosen for respect for 15 of us H2A workers. The most just been here for over the 5 years, and we are here for 7 months. So we want to work 4 hours so we can support our families from Mexico. So if it's 16 hours, we will not come here no more.
Thank you very much for your testimony of your son Eric, and I believe your worker Luz. We appreciate it.
My name is Hemminger. We all want to find our money. We want to put food on people's table from New York State. Cannot handcuff us any more than that.
Well, we thank you. Thank you for your testimony, and we thank you for your letter. I'd ask my fellow board members if they have any questions.
So I guess that's it.
Okay,
Not hearing no questions, moderator, please.
absolutely. Our next speaker is Peter Lennon. Peter, we believe we've unmuted you, and you should be able to unmute yourself. Peter Lennon, are you with us? Okay, our next speaker will be Franz Verdini. Franz, are you with us today? Okay. Our next speaker is Senator George Barrello. Senator, you have been unmuted. You may begin.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak before the Wage Board. I'm George Barrello. I represent the 57th Senate District. I'm also the ranking member of the Senate Agriculture Committee. The district I represent spans the southern tier and western New York. It's a farming-rich region of the state where agriculture is both a livelihood and a way of life. However, it's a way of life that is getting harder to sustain. Farmers have been repeatedly battered by challenges: commodity prices that are below the cost of production, heavy minimum wage increases, weather disasters, trade
Senator,
conflicts.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Do you mind just slowing down a touch for the interpreter?
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, certainly. In 2019, farming and farm workers in New York suffered another hit when the farm labor improvements, harmful provision, 60-hour. The law is big in the fact that these hearings, gathering testimony on potentially lowering, we even have a single growing season at which to evaluate the impact of this law. We are seeking arguments made to flatten the curve were based on data, speculation, anecdote. Decisions made without a factual foundation, we were told, are unreliable. On that point, I agree with the governor. That's why I believe that any attempt to change the 60-hour threshold at this point is grossly premature. Farming is subject to many volatile factors. Any sound evaluation of the law should take into account 3 to 4 years of data at a minimum. This is especially true this year as we faced a once-in-a-century pandemic. Domestic global food supply chains were disrupted, creating new hardships for our farmers. It also taught us that our local food supply chains need to be grocery stores with empty meat cases, shelves cleaned out of butter and milk, imagine scary what if scenarios. Fresh and local goal, just the opposite. As the cost of operating in New York forces more farmers out of business or to bordering states, our local food supply chains will get weaker, not stronger. All of these realities underscore the critical need to keep the current threshold in place, at least until we have real data to evaluate the law's impact on farms, farm workers, and rural economies. I live in an area with a strong agricultural tradition. Both of my grandfathers farmed, and I know what it takes to be a farmer. They are the strongest, toughest, and most honest people you will ever meet. All they want is a fair opportunity to make a living and support their families and the people that they employ. They deserve a fair, honest, and data-driven decision on this pivotal issue that will make or break them. I strongly urge to hold off any changes until we have better data to work with. Our farming community and our farming agriculture economy depends on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Barrello. I'm sorry. Are there any questions of our senator? Moderator.
Wonderful.
Please,
Our
ma'am.
next speaker will be Hannah Warden. And just a reminder for everyone to please deliver your testimony slowly so our interpreters may assist our Spanish-speaking attendees. Thank you. Hannah?
I'll do my best to be slow. I practiced the whole thing and it fit 3 minutes to my normal speed. So I'm Hannah Warden from Clifton Springs and representing my family's dairy farm, Willow Crest Farm. I'm speaking in support of keeping the current 60-hour overtime threshold. I wanted to start out with safety, integrity, and teamwork. These are some of the core values at our farm. For over 40 years, it's been our mission to create a safe, enjoyable, and challenging workplace while providing income for our employees. Due to the Farm Worker Labor Act, we made changes to keep our employees to under 60 hours a week. However, this has not been popular with many employees. While our people are paid fairly and can increase their hourly wage through learning new skills, many want the opportunity to earn additional income through more hours. Unfortunately, our farm cannot afford this overtime expense. So far this year, we've paid 3,000 hours of overtime, costing us an additional $20,000. These numbers do not include our corn harvest, which is starting soon and is our biggest labor demand. If the current overtime threshold were to change to 40 hours, we estimate it would cost the farm $116,000. That represents a 7% increase in our labor costs, and on a dairy farm, labor is the second highest cost. We simply cannot afford this increase, so rather than the employees earning extra income, hours would have to be cut and they would earn less. In this scenario, it's easily foreseen that our employees would start looking for a second job. And I'm not sure about you, but I would much rather work just one job than two. So what is preventing us from being able to afford this 7% increase in labor cost? Milk is a commodity and quite easy to transport, which means we're competing with farmers across the country. If Idaho farmers can stay in business at a low milk price because they don't have to pay overtime, the milk at the grocery store is going to come from those farms and not New York farms. 10 years ago, I never would have dreamed of moving out of the state. My life plan was to raise my kids on the farm and for the kids to take over the farm after me. Now I feel like I have to choose one or the other. If I choose to stay in New York, our business may not remain competitive in this consolidating industry. And by the time my children take it over, it may not be a viable business at all. This choice is something that my husband and I now talk about weekly. And it's something I never thought we would have to talk about. If our farm leaves, 35 jobs would be lost in our area. So for these reasons, I ask you to keep the current overtime threshold at 60 hours, therefore keeping farms in New York State. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Hannah. And we hear you and we appreciate it. Are there any questions of my colleagues, fellow board members? Dennis or Dave? Hearing none, thank you. Chris?
Absolutely. And just a note that, especially because we're asking everyone to read their testimony perhaps a little slower than they had rehearsed, we will be allowing everyone to finish their thoughts. We won't cut you off exactly at 3 minutes. Just wanted to make that clear to everyone today. Our next speaker is going to be Assembly Member Andrew Goodell. Mr. Minority Leader, you have been unmuted and you may begin.
If only my wife knew I was unmuted or muted that easily. Fortunately, she is not within hearing range. But thank you very much for unmuting me and allowing me to address this issue. I represent Chautauqua County, which is the westernmost county in New York State. Between the last agricultural census and the most recent one, the number of farms in my district has dropped by 19%. We have a little over 1,200 active farms still in play. The number of acreage is about 225,000 acres. Agriculture is a huge component of our economy, but as the data shows, it has been struggling. We have a lot of dairy farms and we have a lot of grape vineyards. I think our county produces more grapes than any other county west of or east of the Mississippi. The challenge with each is that there are time periods when the farming operation is highly intensive and needs a lot of attention and a lot of labor. And those time periods are often dictated by the harvest schedule and the weather. So as an example, in dairy farming, the moisture content in hay can be very critical. So if you know you have adverse inclement weather approaching, you have to bring in the hay or you may lose it or have to wait. With the grape harvest, it is also very much weather dependent. And so you have to wait until the grape reaches a certain ripeness, it has the right amount of sugars, and then you need to harvest it quickly. And once they start harvesting the grapes, they don't stop. They have to bring it in. And if you have a rainstorm that occurs in the middle of the harvest, the grapes will pick up the water from the rain and it will affect the quality of the grape. And when your entire livelihood relies on one harvest, it is extraordinarily important that you can bring in the harvest on time. I am strongly recommend that you keep the 60-hour threshold as it is in place, because otherwise what you will find is that those operations that need highly intensive labor for a short time period will work with the neighboring farms and they'll bring in a van with the workers to work 8 hours or whatever hours they can work. They'll then move to the next farm. The net effect is the workers will waste time moving between farms and will lose income. And for many of these workers, these harvest periods are critical for their annual income as well as the farmer's annual income. So recognizing that farming is not the same as a manufacturing operation with predictable schedules and manufacturing schedules and things of that nature, but must be both flexible and capable of dealing with these changing circumstances. It is incredibly important for New York State to provide our farmers and our farm workers with as much flexibility as possible, consistent with their financial constraints. So again, thank you very much for allowing me to testify. And again, I urge that you keep the 60-hour threshold for overtime. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, board members.
Thank you, Assemblyman Goodell. And We appreciate hearing from you. Are there any questions of our Assemblyman? Hearing none, moderator. Chris, please.
Absolutely. Our next speaker will be Carl Novak. Carl Novak, you have been unmuted and may begin.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the committee's members for allowing me to offer my testimony today. I'm speaking in support of keeping the threshold at 60 hours. My name is Carl Novak. I'm the general manager of Half Hollow Nursery in Laurel, New York, on the North Fork of Long Island. We are a 625-acre growing facility, growing woody ornamentals, annuals, and perennials for the landscape industry, and employs over 70 people, 40 of which are seasonal full-time and 30 of which are year-round employees. This has been an extremely challenging year for all businesses, and the ag industry was not exempt from the hardships. Our business was designated as non-essential, and because of this, we were allowed to only do what was necessary to maintain our nursery stock and do whatever spring planting was necessary. Our ability to harvest and sell our product was severely impacted by the shutdown. We reduced our work weeks to 3 to 4 days and reduced our work hours. Even without the hardships of the pandemic and the reduced hours of operation, it would be difficult to evaluate the effect of the new overtime regulations on our business after such a short period of time. With the reduced hours during our peak season, it is even more difficult. Our labor costs account for 50% of our total operating expenses, our largest cost input in our operation. We were able to keep our work week under the 60-hour threshold this year and averaged about 55 to 58 hours per week, and we complied with the 7th day of rest by staggering work days when necessary. However, our crop is a little more forgiving than others as we measure our production cycles in years, not weeks, as the floral, vegetable industries, and other agricultural industries who are dealing with a more highly perishable crop and shorter market windows. However, we are in a highly competitive industry and compete with other growers across the United States. We are already at a disadvantage competing with neighboring states that have a lower minimum wage and no overtime. I am concerned with the health of the ag industry in the state of New York due to its highly regulatory nature and high labor costs and high costs of production. This should be a concern of most people given the disruptions in the food supply chain that we witnessed as a result of the pandemic. I urge the review board to carefully consider making any changes to this current law without having several years of data to base their decisions on. I feel that there are too many variables in agriculture and farming from year to year to make any changes after not even one full year, and especially not even a year after which so many operations were forced to close during their peak season. We have another minimum wage increase on Long Island in 2021. Our costs of production are already some of the highest in the country. We all care about the well-being of our employees. We should also care about the well-being of the agricultural industry in New York, the families that operate them, and the continued supply of the products that they produce to feed us and make our lives better. I urge you to not change this current law until we have several years of more data in hand to evaluate its impact on the agricultural industry.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Novak. Are there any questions? All right, Mr. Chris. Our next testimony, please.
Wonderful. Our next testimony will come from Kathy Chambers. Kathy, are you with us? If you are, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand because we don't see you there. And if not, we will circle back to you. Bradley Cates, I believe, or Catus, you are up next. Brad, you are up. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Brad Cates, and I own and operate Coville Holsteins. Thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to start by asking how any board or institution could make an accurate assessment on any program within 8 months, especially during a pandemic. I own a small dairy farm in southern Onondaga County.
And the 60-hour change that went into effect on January 1st has increased my payroll nearly 10% over last year, produced the same amount of milk. If we keep increasing the cost of production, we'll be out of business and there'll be no jobs. We can't compare farming to any other industry. There's nothing close. We are 100% weather dependent, 365 days of the year. One of the biggest problems we face is that the workload is not evenly distributed throughout the year. New York State has spent thousands of dollars promoting Grown in New York and farm to table programs to keep the farms in business. But at least once a week, someone asks me, where have all the small farms gone? Proposed legislation like this will accelerate the disappearance of all farms from New York State. What I see from my years of experience is that when things like this happen, it's devastating to the industry. People move to other states, go out of business, and then government will come up with incentives for people to come back to work, give them tax breaks, free programs to start up in New York. This won't happen with agriculture. Once it's gone, it's gone. We do not want to get our food from somewhere else. We're trying to fix something that isn't broken. From the beginning of this discussion of overtime, I've never heard anyone tell me they are for it. Not a farmer, not an employee, not anyone. There isn't a farmer in New York State that could survive lowering the overtime threshold. As a tax-paying citizen, I would like to think that the labor board would equally be concerned about the employers being in business to create jobs as well as the welfare of the employee that needs these jobs. There are only 2% of us, and our voice isn't very big, but we feed all of you every day. Please take us seriously. We're all connected by the fact that we must eat. I'd like to close my testimony by saying there's a reason why this wasn't implemented years ago. It all boils down to no government, no labor board can decide when it's going to rain or snow or the sun's going to shine. Thank you. And any question?
Thank you, Mr. Cates. Do we have any questions? Okay, next testimony, Chris.
Our next testimony will be Jake Ledoux. Jake, you have been unmuted.
Thank you very much, sir. My name is Jake Ledoux. I work for North Harbor Dairy and Robbins Family Grain, where we strive to do right by the land, animals, and the people that the business depends on to sustain itself into the future. I'd like to talk about that word for a moment, depend. One of its definitions in the dictionary is to rely on. And that's a good way to talk about the employees and the farm's relationship. The farm relies on us to do the work to keep it running, and we rely on the farm to turn a profit so we can do it again next year. Unlike many Americans, I can say I love my job truthfully, and I greatly enjoy the people I work with, whether they came here from internationally or grew up 10 miles down the road. Many people work here from all walks of life. We have college-educated workers, tradesmen, veterans, military wives, grandfathers, fathers, sons, mothers, and daughters. We're here because we enjoy what we do and we are able to make a good living in the process. Just as the farm relies on these folks to keep the business running, their families rely on them to keep a roof over their heads, a task that is no small feat in a rural area with limited employment opportunities. Folks with high school diplomas can make $50,000 plus with paid on-the-job training. For many, this is a perfect fit. Many would like you to believe that reducing overtime to under 60 hours is a good thing, and I will counter that statement. This is a slim margin industry that only has begun to unbury ourselves from a few years of extremely depressed prices, and it shows in every farm you drive by. This law, for all of its good intentions, falls short and hurts the people who we as a rural society and the farm rely on most, our employees. If 60 hours turns to 50 hours or 40 hours, you will create a cataclysm in the countryside like none before. Employees will leave to go elsewhere, maybe even out of state. farming operations that pay huge amounts of taxes and bring in millions upon millions in revenue to the local, county, and state coffers will be nothing more than rust and cobwebs on yet another auction block. Those that came here from beyond our national borders will be heard as money that supported them and their families back home will vanish. And young farmers like myself, invested in the future of this state and its agricultural industry, will be left with no other option but the 40-hour-a-week grind again in some fluorescent-lit cubicle with only limited earning potential. I live this business along with my co-workers in this way of life, and we are out in the fields, barns, and elements because we want to be there. I ask you as someone who now depends on you to please make the choice to keep the 60-hour-a-week threshold. My career and those of my coworkers, both Hispanic and Caucasian, our rural economy and the future of agriculture and our great state depend on it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Jake. We really appreciate hearing from you. Are there any questions, comments? Okay, Mr. Moderator, Chris.
Wonderful. Richard Stupp is our next speaker, all the way from Cornell.
Hello, my name is Richard Stupp, and I lead the Cornell Ag Workforce Development Program. I'm here to make 4 points. First, we need to collect multiple years of data about the current farm labor law impact before changing the current policy. Second, farm employee compensation based on actual data is already higher than many people realize. Third, overtime encourages employers to limit hours and replace labor with capital. Fourth, at least one part of the farm workforce, Hispanic dairy farm employees, based on research, are working the number of hours that they want to work. So the first point, we know anecdotally that farms with year-round employees are actively changing employee schedules in response to the existing 60-hour overtime threshold.
Just going to interrupt really quick. Do you mind slowing down just a touch? I appreciate it.
No one currently has data to describe the impact of these changes on farms or employees. Seasonal workforces are just now assembling for the current crop year, and we can only speculate about how farms and employees will adapt. We are forming right now a team of academic researchers from Cornell College of Ag and Life Sciences, the School of Industrial and Labor Relations, and the Dyson School of Applied Economics and Management to conduct research and study the impact of these labor law changes. The second point, according to the National Ag Statistics Service, gross wages for all hired farm employees in the Northeast 1 region, which is mostly New York, remained above $15 an hour throughout 2019. This figure does not include other benefits such as cash bonuses, housing, or provided meals. Our research indicated that additional pay and benefits typically adds about $3 an hour to farm employee pay, which would put total compensation over $18 an hour for farm employees in 2019. Now, that's on average. There's many employees that earn much more than that. Third point, we have good reason to believe that farms will take steps to avoid paying overtime. Even in the pre-COVID low unemployment environment, when employees were hard to find, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that average overtime hours for non-farm employees was only about 3.2 hours per week. Farms will likely adopt strategies to limit overtime hours for employees. They will also adopt technology and change production plans to reduce labor expenses. All of these strategies will impact farm profitability and the earning potential of farm employees. Fourth point, research conducted in 2016 with over 200 Hispanic dairy employees found that on average, workers insisted on working at least 57 hours per week, are actually working 67 hours per week, and would like to work about 67.6 hours per week. This would indicate that the current 60-hour threshold is pretty close to the weekly hours that this group of employees wants to work on average. I recommend that this wage board freeze the overtime at 60 hours for a period of at least 3 years. This will give the Department of Labor, academic researchers, farmers, and employees time to gather data and assess the impact of recent changes on both farms and employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stubb. for that information that you provided. Do we have any questions? Comments? Okay.
If I might add, I did include a written report with significantly more information and data for your information.
And thank you for that also. Anyone who provides any additional information in writing, we will be glad to not only receive it, but I can make a commitment that we will also review it so that we can take it into consideration. We realize the 3-minute limitation doesn't give us adequate time to hear the fullness of your experiences and your expertise. So thank you for that. Mr. Moderator, Chris.
Wonderful. So we have a few folks up next who we're not seeing in the Zoom. So I'm going to read your names. And if you are here, perhaps under a different person's name or not your full name, just going to ask you to raise your hand and we'll unmute you. And if we don't call you around, like I said, we'll call the names again. Peg Dickman from Dickman Farms. Stephen Cowles from Cowles Farms. How about Ken Migliorelli? Ken, are you on? Okay. Teresa McMahon. Bill Purdy. Brian Reeves. Oh, I see Millie. Millie's iPad. Okay, Brian, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Say your name.
Hello, this is Steve Coles.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, is it my turn to speak?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Steve Coles. My brother and I own and operate a small dairy farm in Otisco, New York. Our farm has been in business at this location for over 100 years. I am a 4th-generation family farmer here. We have 2 employees who have been here for several years that do our milking. Otherwise, John, my brother, and I do the rest of the work with our families. Since New York passed the recent labor law, which went into effect January 1, it has put a stress and hardship on our farm. Our employees had been working about 65 hours a week and were very satisfied with the pay, housing, hours, and time off. We were very satisfied with the quality of their work and the time it took them to do it. Now, with the new law enacted, we feel the stress of increased labor costs and the pressure to work faster, possibly at the expense of quality and safety. This stress has been added to our farm because of laws imposed upon us, not the free market demands. The laws imposed upon us have also increased our cost of production. The dairy industry has had 5 years of depressed milk prices, which have eaten into the equity of our business. Also, there is no way for us to pass our expenses on to anyone else. As profit margins get smaller, our businesses are faced with difficult choices, such as leave farming, bankruptcy, or relocation. Another thing worth noting is the economic impact agriculture has on our state. The revenues of agriculture are vast and deep, from the processing plants to equipment dealerships, trucking industry, research and development, and much more. Thousands of people are employed and billions of dollars change hands in New York because of agriculture. America operates in large part on a free market economic system, especially in agriculture. This is why America has more food, more variety, higher quality, and less of our paychecks go toward purchasing food than any nation or country in the history of the world. When an entity such as New York, who does not understand our business, nor have they invested the blood, sweat, and toil to establish it, and New York legislatures tells us what we can and cannot do, we are doomed. The recent law has put New York dairy farmers at a competitive disadvantage with our neighboring states. When imposed regulations and burdensome wage laws put us in such a negative position, the only option is to leave the state or bankruptcy. We implore you to let us pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If our employees thought we were not treating them well, they would have left us a long time ago. Let us raise our families with the values that we cherish: hard work, the love of open space, caring for the land and animals, values that God has entrusted to us. Let us provide for our country the abundance of low cost, high quality food we frankly take for granted. I ask you to keep the 60-hour work week and do not lower it to 40 hours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. We appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
And I'd ask my fellow board members if they have any questions of him. I don't see any. So moderator, if you would proceed.
Absolutely. Our next speaker is Brian Reeves. Brian, I'm not sure if you've joined.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Absolutely.
Okay, I'm Brian Reeves, president of the New York State Vegetable Growers Association, which represents the fresh market and processing vegetable industry in New York. I also operate a fresh market vegetable and berry farm in Baldwinsville with three brothers, we're all part of the fourth generation, and a niece and nephew who are the fifth generation. I'm here to share a couple facts about vegetable farms in New York. Number one, we are at the mercy of weather and climate more so than any other occupation that I know of. Almost every decision we make on our farms is impacted in some way by Mother Nature, and so presents the greatest risk to our businesses. Climate controls what we grow and when, and thus when we work on a macro level. Weather determines what, how, and when we perform certain tasks on a day-to-day level. And the timing of our tasks is critical to our success. We deal with living organisms on our farms, so timeliness in performing most tasks can mean the difference between success and failure. Pests and weeds are most easily controlled at certain growth stages. The more we depart from the optimum schedule, the less success we have in controlling them. The maturity of our crops has a very small window for peak harvest. The further we are from that peak, the more flavor, nutrition, shelf life, and appearance are diminished. We attempt to reduce this risk by using irrigation, frost protection, growing on well-drained soil, etc., but we never truly eliminate the risk. Thus, we can't just put on a second shift and produce widgets at night, and we cannot plant in February, which would be a usual response to overtime law. The timeliness of care for living things is so critical that we don't have much flexibility to change work schedules. I've heard comparisons to the construction industry concerning the impacts of weather and climate. While there exists some commonality, the comparison falls apart when we realize that the product of our labor is a living organism and has a limited shelf life. We may need to hang sheetrock today instead of pouring cement because it is too cold outside, but neither the sheetrock nor the cement will die or diminish in quality if it doesn't happen right now. Our plants will suffer or die the more we depart from the critical timeliness of our work schedule. Another fact, hiring more workers is not a viable option for most farms. A response to the severe limits on the flexibility to schedule tasks is often to, quote, just hire more workers and have them each work less. This is much easier said than done. Some farms are attempting to hire a few more workers in order to stay near the 60-hour threshold. However, if the threshold moves down, the number of workers needed will be more than most farms can handle. For all H-2A workers and many other workers, we must supply housing and utilities for free. A good estimate for housing construction, which meets all regulations, is $13,000 per worker. Recruitment and transportation of a worker averages about $1,000 per worker. Additional toilets in the field, hand washing stations, towels, and water can easily run $20 per worker per month. So if a farm had 60 workers for 6 months at a time before the legislation and decided to double the workforce in order to stay near a new 40-hour threshold, they would incur $780,000 as a one-time upgrade to housing and $67,000 in annual additional expenses for this workforce before they even planted one seed. These numbers don't include many incidentals such as repairs, upkeep to the housing, extra management costs for double the workers, interest, etc. And even if all of this occurred, there is no guarantee that any worker will come anyway because they don't want to work less than 60 hours. Several fresh market vegetable farms in the 300 to 400 acre range have calculated that if they left their workforce and hours the same as in the past and just paid the overtime, that it would cost them between $120,000 and $200,000 per season additional, just for labor. With the margins afforded farmers currently, these are both unsustainable options. Thank you. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thank you, Brian. Do we have any questions?
David, we will unmute you momentarily.
Okay. I don't
Brian,
see questions by my,
hear me?
David, please.
Brian, you talked a lot about timeliness and quality and price. Can you share a little bit more about how quickly some of these crops change and how critical it is?
Sure. Here's an example. We can grab any number of crops and can talk about it. Strawberries. We grow strawberries. We try to cover every one of our acres of strawberries, if not every other day, certainly every third day for harvest, that is. If we don't get there every third day, overripe fruit is unsaleable. It's got to be picked off and disposed of. So the timing is critical to harvest that crop. Oftentimes, as you know, with the field crops you grow too, weed control is at a certain weed stage. And so you have a window of maybe 1 week to get your weed sprays on or to cultivate if you're an organic farmer and you have mechanical cultivation. Again, if you miss that window, then much more expensive methods of weed control are necessary. Cucumbers, tomatoes, we pick the entire crop every other day. It grows so rapidly that we need to pick it every other day. Regardless, rain, shine, whatever, we've got to make amends so that we can get through that crop every other day. If we, for some reason, miss it up to a third or fourth day, the tomatoes are overripe and physical damage occurs to them, making them unsaleable. Cucumbers literally get too big. Many home gardeners can attest to zucchini that are as big as their arm or cucumbers that are like a small watermelon. Those are unsaleable. So it's critical to get them harvested during peak size, moisture, texture, and nutritional value. With fresh market vegetables, this just goes on and on and on. And I'm sure you could comment about animal care, how critical that is and timeliness is.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions of our board members? Moderator, Chris?
Wonderful. Angie Renna is our next speaker. Angie, we've asked you to unmute, and you may unmute yourself and speak.
Well, hi there. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity tonight. I'm just here to listen to my friends who are representing their farms in the central New York area. I am representing the 50th district as a candidate for New York State Senate. So my purpose here tonight is to really make sure that the voices are heard for our farm friends. And I appreciate the opportunity for them to have a hearing on this matter because it is so important, the livelihood of our farms. So with that, I don't want to take up anyone else's time and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Moderator, if you would call on our next speaker.
Absolutely. Todd Hyman is our next speaker, and we've not seen him sign in. If he could raise his hand. And if not, we're going to go to Nelda Toussaint next. Nelda, you were here. I'm not sure if you left, and we'll circle back to you on that. Is Keith Kimball here? Keith, you've been unmuted and may begin.
Hi, I'm Keith Kimball. I have a 900 cow dairy in Livingston County, New York, and I manage another 1,650 cow dairy in Wyoming County, New York. I grew up on a dairy farm, but my farm in New York is a first generation farm. Our cost of labor has risen 11% since the beginning of 2020. It's not been a great market to evaluate earnings because of the impact of COVID-19. However, there are no great market indicators that I see that show that because of increased labor costs, we will have increased earnings. I'd caution against anything that would further cut into the potential profits that businesses in New York can earn. For me, I've reinvested every dollar of profit I've ever made into my business in New York. I've gone from employing 6 people in 2012 to 16 in 2020, as well as managing another 20 employees on a neighboring dairy operation. The jobs that have been created or supported by my business are important to the people that hold them. And we have created well-paying jobs ranging from $40,000 a year plus housing to $90,000 a year. I think it's important to realize that the employees on these farms have very different backgrounds and very different wants. I have entry-level employees that want a job that is easy to learn, repetitive, and consistent. And the pay rate for this job is different than the pay rate for an employee that has a 4-year education and a drive to master their job and look for the next place where they can add value to our business. There's nothing wrong with either of these approaches. Both these employee profiles are important to me and both add value to our business. The value is different, so it's not fair for me to demand more from an employee that wants the entry-level position just so I can justify their pay rate. And it's also not fair or responsible for me to not allow an employee to grow and add value and then not compensate them for that. Sometimes I feel it feels as though businesses should feel guilty about making a profit. There's no profit, there's no money or incentive to reinvest and maintain and create jobs. We need to be aware of how the state's actions will affect the ability of businesses to exist and maintain or create jobs. If New York businesses are continually asked to pay more for the same job without generating more revenue for that job, then that job will cease to exist. This is not good for the employer or the employee. This wage board is tasked with a huge responsibility, both to the business owners that have invested in New York and created jobs, and more importantly, to the people that hold these jobs. Please consider that the most important thing here is that these jobs exist. I think that's something both employers and employees want.
Thank you, Keith, very much. Are there any questions? Okay.
All right, wonderful. Our next speaker is going to be Erica Cortez, and I'm not sure if Erica has joined us. If Erica wants to raise her hand. And if not, we're going to go to Carlos Cordona, who's our next speaker.
Hola, buenas tardes. Yo como trabajador agrícola, me gustaría, por favor, y estoy de acuerdo, que se nos otorgara, por favor, que nos otorguen el overtime después de 40 horas. Yo por años estuve trabajando con el salario mínimo que eran $7.25 y voluntariamente no me daban aumento hasta que yo no exigía el aumento a mi patrón. Entonces, estaba trabajando turno semanal de 84 horas, 12 horas diarias y un turno de 72 horas. Tenía un descanso a cada tercera semana. Y cuando salió esta ley que nos iban a dar overtime después de 60 horas, bueno, antes yo le decía a mi patrón que era un día de descanso extra para estar con mi familia. Y bueno, dice, lo siento mucho, no se puede. Es como trabajamos y si te parece y si no, pues te puedes ir. Entonces, ahora que salió la ley del overtime, resulta que nos dieron más descanso, pero eso fue para ellos no pagarnos el overtime. Sí, entonces yo siento que solamente nos explotaban, nos hacían trabajar turnos de 84 horas porque no había una ley que nos apoyara. Ahora que tenemos una ley que nos apoye para reconocer nuestro trabajo después de 40 o 60 horas, ellos redujeron las horas, nos dieron menos horas. También he peleado mucho para que nos pongan buena agua en las casas, porque la agua de las casas realmente huele mal, apesta. Tengo que comprar agua de galones para calentar y poder bañar a mi hija con agua limpia. Entonces, me redujeron las horas, se redujo mi cheque, mas sin embargo, yo sigo gastando igual, ¿sí? Sigo gastando igual para poder mantener a mi familia de pie. Entonces, me gustaría mucho que en nombre de todos mis compañeros, estoy hablando, somos más de 50 trabajadores y muchos amigos que tengo que trabajan en la agricultura, que fueron perjudicados también, que les redujeron horas y automáticamente, económicamente, fuimos perjudicados, que nuestro cheque se redujo bastante, pero nos gustaría que por favor nos apoyen con esto. Agradecemos en lo personal, agradezco a mi patrón, agradezco a las personas que nos han dado trabajo, eso lo agradezco mucho, siempre voy a estar agradecido, pero quisiera que reconozcan nuestro trabajo un poquito más y de esta manera es como nos lo van a demostrar.
Thank you, Mr. Cardona, for taking time to, thank you so much for sharing your information with us. Are there any questions? Hearing none, I'd ask our moderator for our next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is going to be Crispin Hernandez.
Y hola. Sí, buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Yo fui trabajador de lechería por más de 3 años, ¿no? Aquí estoy representando a todos mis compañeros y compañeras que están trabajando en cualquier industria en la agricultura en el estado de Nueva York. Que muchos no pudieron estar aquí por, primer lugar, muy corto plazo, nos avisaron del panel. Número 2, porque muchos de ellos están trabajando ahorita de noche. Y la otra cosa es de que ellos viven en muchas áreas rurales, como todos los patrones saben, que no tienen internet. Ni siquiera a veces saben usar, por ejemplo, la aplicación de Zoom. Por eso es muy importante que nos escuchen los asambleístas, los senadores, para cambiar la industria agrícola, porque por muchas décadas esta ley es muy bueno para nosotros. Por más de 80 años nunca hemos tenido algo así. Entonces, queremos que después de 40 horas, que nos den las horas extra. ¿Por qué digo esto que es muy importante? Porque hay muchos trabajadores que trabajan más de 12 horas. Hay algunos trabajadores que ya llevan 10, 15 años trabajando en la agricultura. Están cansados porque somos humanos, ¿no? Porque el cuerpo se gasta y queremos proteger nuestras vidas como humanos para poder seguir trabajando fuerte, alimentando todas las familias del mundo. Y nosotros los trabajadores agrícolas somos la fuerza laboral del estado de Nueva York. Y gracias a nuestra labor estamos apoyando la economía del estado de Nueva York. Pero ¿qué es lo que pasa ahorita? Que estamos viviendo ahorita lo del COVID-19. Es algo muy histórico. Pero ahorita nos llaman que somos esenciales, pero no dan nuestras protecciones. Por ejemplo, las horas extra y muchas protecciones más que merecemos, ¿no? Entonces ya es hora que esto cambie. Es una injusticia. Ya esto es el momento de que queremos igualdad como humano, ¿no? Es muy importante, ¿verdad? Porque somos parte de la cadena, de la cadena alimentaria. Gracias a nuestra labor, día con día, están creciendo las compañías, están creciendo los ranchos, pero si nos volteamos a ver, los trabajadores son los que están trabajando ahorita. yo diría gracias a mis compañeros y mis compañeras que están trabajando bien fuerte ahorita, a pesar de lo que estamos viviendo, nos están alimentando ahorita. Y pido por favor aquí a los asambleístas y los senadores y todas y todos, escuchemos los voces de nosotros, de los trabajadores, porque nosotros lo vivimos, lo hacemos, sea frío y calor. Esto es muy importante que cambie. Si queremos una sociedad mejor en nuestra comunidad, en donde estamos viviendo, entonces es el momento de cambiarlo para el bien de todas y de todos, dejar una nueva realidad para nuestros hijos y hijas que vienen atrás. Es súper importante, ¿verdad? Y principalmente, ¿verdad? Ya es el momento de que cambie esto, porque ya estamos cansados, ¿verdad? Ya estamos cansados de vivir esto. Es muy importante y que nos escuchen y para que podamos vivir una sociedad mejor. Y principalmente le pido aquí a los asambleístas, los senadores y principalmente el gobernador Andrew Cuomo, que toma la responsabilidad, ¿verdad? Ellos pueden hacer este cambio y también aquí los patrones, ¿verdad? Que tomemos conciencia para hacer este cambio una realidad. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez, for coming out tonight and representing your women and men who you work side by side with. Are there any questions? Hearing none. Chris, our next
Wonderful.
testimony.
Sure. So this actually concludes the list of individuals who have pre-registered to deliver testimony. And instead of reading through the names that I still don't see in the list, what I will say is if anyone at this point would like to deliver testimony, and if they did not pre-register, I will ask you to please click on raise hand on the Zoom meeting, and we will call upon you to give your testimony. Okay, our first is going to be, and I'm not sure who this is, it just says Monk Teb. So I will ask you to unmute and you may deliver your testimony. You got it. There you go.
You can hear me now, sir?
We can hear you now.
Oh, this is Assemblyman Brian Mankfellow from the 130th District. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. It was great to listen to the testimony of everybody that was on this evening. As a farmer and former farming, working with laborers and having people help harvest my crop, we build such a huge relationship with these individuals. And as I listened to the farmers this evening, and the workers as well from Hemdale Farms and then the last two, there's such a diverse difference between the two. It really makes me think a little bit. But I know right now, as I agree with some of the previous people that testified, that we've got to look at this for several years. Right now, especially coming out of COVID, how is this going to work for everyone? How is it going to work for our farms? And our farmers right now are absolutely struggling. And I just want to make sure that we take a hard look and let those numbers come through. We always talk about looking at the numbers, the true numbers. Well, let's look at them. We did a great thing by moving it to 60 hours, which they never had before for 80 years. So let's also give the farmers the benefit of the doubt to look at those numbers. And that's what I'll be pushing from my position, that we promote our ag as we do, and let these people, the professionals that work with these individuals each and every day, do this. And let's trust them, and let's trust them and their workers, because I know they do a great job. So thank you for everyone that testified this evening. I will definitely be in your corner as we move forward and making sure we do what we need to do in the state legislators for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman, for being with us this evening and for your comments. Are there any questions of the Assemblyman? Hearing none. Moderator, do we have anyone else who would like to?
Sure. At this point, I do not see any additional folks with their proverbial hands raised. Again, just one more reminder, if you would just click on raise hand if you would like to deliver testimony and you were not pre-registered today to speak. We will give it just a little bit more time. And at this point, I do not see anyone else who wishes to deliver testimony. Madam Chairwoman.
Well, I thank you, Chris, for your moderation of this evening's panel. This will conclude our hearing for this evening. I'd like to remind you that not only was the hearing recorded, but all materials related to today's hearing will be posted on the Department of Labor's website. And that website address is labor.ny.gov. There's more information showing on the moderator's slide so that if you'd like to encourage others or be a part yourselves of our two upcoming hearings tomorrow at noon and Monday at noon, or submit any written testimony, you can use that information as posted on the screen to provide that to us. We want to thank you for sharing with us this evening, those of you who testified, and for those who came to listen and hear so that we can all better understand what the experiences are and take the information and make the best recommendations to move forward in New York State. So again, please take advantage of the ability to provide any written testimony. Those that have provided that or in person, we will make a commitment to you that we will consider everything. Again, thank you so much. And I ask you to please continue to be safe and continue to be well. Good night.